video is going to be on sort of combat training in period in the Viking Age. And it's sort of a topic that there isn't that much known about. And as well, there's not really that much I know about it. And I kind of want to know more. But there are a few insights that I have that might sort of be of interest to people. So let me start off by saying that there isn't really much evidence at all for any formalized training in the Viking Age. Later on, with the Gragas law books, they sort of mandated that every man of a certain of military age, be the owner of a weapon, be it an axe, a sword, a spear, and sometimes depending on the version of the book or the country of origin, of the law, there's even mandates saying that you must own a seax, a spear, and either an axe or a sword, as well as a shield. And you had to train with all of those. But previous to 1066, there wasn't really much evidence. There's not really much evidence for that, though they had to have trained in some way. So let's start off with just sort of the average guy who's going into battle. He probably has, a spear or an axe and maybe a seax. So these people, when you think about who they are, they're, they're loggers, they're farmers, maybe some of them are hunters. And so this is a tool they'd use every day. Chopping kindling, chopping firewood, coppicing trees, processing different types of wood, even skinning and butchering large animals. This kind of axe is used. Different styles sometimes as well. So, but just an axe like this that they probably would have pulled double duty as a weapon and a tool. So this person's muscle memory is basically tuned for using this in various strokes with penetrating blows, so that it works efficiently. So this is not something that they would have to train particularly long with to be proficient at. That also kind of indicates why it was one of the favorite weapons of the Viking. It's because it's something they would use every day. They would know how to do that, unless they were in a trade or social status that they didn't have to use this every day. But a lot of them were just farmers. And so axes were things they used a lot, so they would know how to do that. And so the only thing they would really have to train with it is hooking shields and using it to hook things like limbs and stuff. Because, using it as a hacking weapon, they'd know how to do that. And it would come as second nature. And it's fairly self-explanatory. So this one is pretty well. I don't think they really had to train too hard with an axe, because chopping some wood and swinging it at somebody with intent are two very, very similar things. Now for using saxes, pardon the saxchetti. There's the idea that every free man had a knife of some type, be it a broad sax like this, or one of the longer saxes, or even, fairly small. But it's something that they would also know quite well how to use. If you have this as a weapon, you're going to train with it in some respect, whether it's training with a pell or something like that, or against a tree or something, just to get the feel for how it's used. But it's also kind of not necessarily this one. This is more of a slashing thing because of the weight and everything. But again, it's more of it's a pokey weapon. So there's not much to stabbing. There's not too much to that. Whether it's stabbing an ice pick, which is the strongest human motion, or strongest primate motion. We even see monkeys smashing nuts and stuff and breaking open coconuts and whatever with rocks in the same form as this. And later on, we see with rondel daggers and stuff, that's how they were used. Saxes could probably be used either way. Though there's no evidence they had guards, which would lead to, if it met resistance, your hand could slide. That's why a modified grip is used, where the butt end of it, obviously not on this one because of the little swell there. If it's a cylindrical handle, the butt of it can actually rest in the palm of your hand very, very strongly, so that if it's thrust into something and meets resistance, it's pushing into your hand, not your hand sliding off the blade. But these things, it could be that, or one thing which could also be training for sword and all that stuff are, think back to when you were a child, and you and your friends got together and you found a bunch of sticks and you started sword fighting with the sticks. Well, you can cut sticks to different lengths. So as a child, you cut one to the approximate length of your father's seax, and you can play that way. And that gets down. It has nothing to do with edge alignment at this point, because obviously a round object versus a blade which has an edge. So you can't really do edge alignment with these. But what it does is it gives the person sort of a feel for striking with it, and how close they can get before they get hit, kind of thing. What's the effective range of this object, and then they can move up to the real thing when they become a man and stuff. So in a way, I think a lot of the training for these things has to do with playtime as a child, as well as muscle memory from working and all these things. And then when we get into sword, because sword is a status object, that's a lot of metal and a lot of value in period. So there would have to be some level of, obviously there's a level of status associated with it. So the combatant that has that also has the time to train with it. And sword fighting is a little more complex in certain ways than axes are, because with an axe, even if this had a round handle, you can somewhat feel where the edge is. Obviously not quite as well as if it's this kind of oblong, oval-shaped oblong thing, or and obviously when you swing with a round handle with an axe, it wants to weather vane. But you can feel where the edge is. Swords, because of the way they're balanced and everything, it's not quite as easy. So there needs to be a lot more training for these than with axes, as well as this has a totally unique feel to it compared to an axe, because axes, hammers, all these different tools feel very similar, and their use is very similar. Swords are different, so they would need some level of training. And again, just a stick that's the same length as a sword, as a child, doing it that way. But then when you move up to being an adult, and you have the sword and you have all this stuff and you're training for it, to me, like there's no evidence that the Vikings actually had wooden wasters, to the best of my knowledge. Not in the way that we know them today. They may have done something where they take a stick and shave off two sides so it does have edges, but there's no evidence for that. Nothing survived, and it could be just that they were seen as disposable objects. They were made to be broken. But beyond that, because the value of one of these is quite a lot, and you don't want to wreck it before you need it. So I don't think they would have trained so much with sharp weapons. They may have trained a little bit with them, and certainly that kind of training would obviously be half speed and without intent and all this stuff, because at the time they didn't have the kind of medical treatment we have. So today obviously we don't want to hurt each other, but if we do get hurt, there are more chances that we will survive. Back then, if you got hurt, especially cut with a blade that had cut other objects, there was a high chance you would die, either from the wound itself or from the subsequent infection. So it would be very dangerous to train with a sharp, but they also didn't have blunts. So that kind of fills in, what was going on with that. And so I suppose some of it would have been done, probably solo drills and things with this against some kind of a Pell type object. But I don't think they would have sparred with swords. So there's that. And then what leaves the last thing for me, every man had to train. Oh, well, actually not the last thing. When we're talking about bow and arrow and spears, both of those were fairly common hunting implements. So a man who hunts on a regular basis, which could have been a large number of people, if they hunt with archery, they're obviously going to know how to use that bow very effectively, because you want to have the cleanest kill possible, not just because of the welfare of the animal and all that stuff, because another part of it is when the animal dies quickly, the meat tastes better. So that's a good thing, but it's also because of you don't want to have to track this animal for hours and then maybe have the animal eaten by a bear. While you're tracking it, you come across the carcass and there's a bear eating it, and you can't really chase away that bear, because then you are chasing a 1,000-pound animal away from food, which is never a good idea. So they would want to be able to hit the animal where it's going to kill it the fastest. So they don't have to track it so far. They can butcher it and they can get out of there before bears and other animals like wolves and stuff show up. So obviously they're going to know how to do that very well. Same thing with spears. Spears, one technique that was used by the Vikings quite a lot to hunt things like moose and bear was they would have their dogs. In Norway, they had the Norwegian elk hound. They have a team of them which would hold the animal at bay, and then a group of men would come up and spear the animal from different sides and try and kill it very quickly before that happens. So they would know how to use a spear. It's just not really training so much with the use of spear. So that leads me to the last part, where they always use shields, or almost always use shields. So that's something that they would have to train with. If you are going on a raid, it's not as important, because any peasant can kill any peasant with an axe. It's not that hard of a concept, especially if you're going up against somebody who's not armed. If you're going up against other armed groups, you sort of just have to overpower them and kill them. But if it's a standing battle where you have to, lock shields, go into a shield wall, receive arrows and all that stuff, you have to have trained with shield. Because I remember when my group first started training with shields and doing shield wall tactics and everything, it was pretty bad. All the shield walls would fall apart and all that stuff. And they couldn't stand up to a berserker attack very well. So that was that. But then we trained a little bit, and it doesn't take that long. We trained a little bit, and now they can hold off a berserker for a while. So much so that last time I charged the wall, I broke a shield, which means the wall held pretty darn solid. So that kind of training, and even in wolf packs, locking those shields properly and staying together as a cohesive unit is very, very, very important. And it is something that takes a while to train into people, that shield discipline. And so, and even the proper use of a shield while fighting in single combat. And part of judicial fighting, Holmgang, is they had shields. And they had a number of shields just in case. I think it was 3 shields, and once they broke, that's it. There are 3 shields each. And so it's very important to know how to use that shield. Whether it's to use it in a biomechanically appropriate way, such as the way that Roland Wojcicka teaches, or whether it's just to use it as a thing to hide behind. It's still important that you figure that out and you train with that, so that your working hand doesn't have all the strength, and your other hand isn't able to hold this thing. Like, you don't want that. You want to be able to move this shield around and use it to manipulate the other person's weapon, use it to manipulate the other person in general. Or else, if you go up against somebody who is a little more well-trained or a little bit stronger, well, then you're screwed. So shield is something that they would have had to train quite a bit in before they were able to go and actually stand up in battle. Because if they went up against some warriors that were actually like a standing army, they would be destroyed. And I guess there are numerous archaeological examples of that happening, where they go up against a standing army who's far more well-trained than they are, and they get destroyed. And I think every freeman would have trained in some respect to use these weapons, just because of the time period that was there. They were living in a time period where you had different warring groups all around. You had people who were going around, basically bandits within Scandinavia. And so it's not even just the people who are going raiding or the people who are going adventuring should know how to do this, or the people who are guarding the trade route to Constantinople. It's pretty much anybody who lived anywhere needed to know somewhat how to defend themselves. Because when the people who did know how to defend themselves were off doing the things that they needed to know how to do that stuff with, for a living, like, the people that went to Viking, who's there to defend the village? Who's there to defend the farmstead? So those people would have had to know how to fight as well. So I think there was some level of training. Even if it was just, once a week, some people got together and fought each other with sticks, fought each other unarmed, anything. But I really don't think it was a big organized thing, and I do think they had, in some respect, had a system of combat, and different things that worked, but I really think that it was still sort of in the infancy of, maybe not the infancy, but like the teenage years of, martial combat in Europe. And then that eventually developed into some of the other fighting systems by some of the fight masters and all stuff that actually were able to record their knowledge. I think it definitely evolved out of the different fight styles of all the different peoples around Europe, and the Middle East a little bit had some influence. So, I don't think the Vikings had a like fight school kind of thing or any kind of formalized training. I do think that the people that were in charge of raiding parties and in charge of different armies and stuff obviously made sure that the people that they had under their employment were able to fight, and were able to fight to a certain level, and they probably trained people a little bit more so that they were 100% sure on what was happening, and different formation commands and stuff, so that everybody was familiar and say on the same page, so that everything worked and they didn't just get slaughtered. So, yeah. So that's just sort of a few ideas that I've been thinking about in the last little while. So, I guess, thank you for watching. If you like what you see, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thank you.